Hello everyone, and thanks for joining me. I'm Brother Bertrand, and I wanted to talk to you today about the Inquisition. So this is a term that when people hear it, they cringe and withdraw. Oh, it was just this horrible thing. But that's not necessarily true. It's a matter of understanding its history, knowing its purpose. What was this thing? So what is the Inquisition? Is it a group of people? Is it a time period? Is it a crusade? What was this thing that people to this day fear so much? And do they need to fear it? So the answer to that is the Inquisition is an office of the Roman Catholic Church. So, for example, like the Roman Rota. What is the Roman Rota? Well, it's the ecclesiastical court. The Apostolic Camera. What is that? Well, the Apostolic Camera is basically the church's treasury. So what then was the purpose of the Holy Office of the Inquisition? And the answer to that, let me give you an analogy to explain what that means exactly. Let's say, for example, you're in your home and spring is coming along, and you're going to be getting, in addition to things that already exist in your house, dust and pet dander. You're also now going to have pollen, and so you're really going to be having some health issues. So what do? Well, you make sure that you change your furnace filter, which is both for heat and air conditioning. So you go down to the basement or out to the garage, wherever you happen to keep your filters, and you install this filter in your furnace. And the reason you do that is to filter out things that are harmful to you. And that is what the Inquisition was for. It was to filter out things from the church that were harmful to it. Now, if you ask the average person today, mostly fundamentalist Christians, most Protestants understand what the Inquisition was and are not nearly as volatile in their opinions of it as fundamentalist Christians are. Let me first define those two things. So a Protestant is a group that was once part of the Catholic Church, and for whatever reason, they decided, hey, we don't agree with this, so we're going to split and go our own way. Very similar to Orthodox, but the Orthodox, on the other hand, didn't necessarily split and go their own way and create their own religion. They basically tried to retain as much of the original religion as they could, but they refused to do it as part of the Roman Catholic Church, under a church hierarchy. They refused to do that. So what are fundamentalist Christians? Well, fundamentalists are people who, years and years after the fact, got a hold of a copy of the Bible and started reading it and said, no, these people, they had got it all wrong. This is really what he meant. And so they start interpreting the Bible in their own way. What they don't understand is that the Bible is not the repository of the faith. And it never was. It was never intended to be. The repository of the faith is oral tradition as handed down from the apostles themselves. That's what our Lord meant when he told them, go forth and teach you the things that I've commanded you. He wasn't talking about writing anything down or having like a classroom situation. He was talking about going out and preaching. Oral tradition. So the Bible wasn't even assembled until a couple hundred years later. So it was pretty much irrelevant to early Christianity. So these modern day fundamentalist Christians and some Protestants want you to believe that the Inquisition was this thing where if anybody disagreed with the church, they would be rounded up and murdered by the tens of thousands, even into the millions. I recently saw a meme that suggested that throughout the 600 years of the Inquisition, there were over 50 million people put to death simply because they refused to become Roman Catholic. Is there any truth to that? There can't be. If you look at the height of the Inquisition, so basically around 1500 to about 1520, when it was at its peak, The city of Paris, France, was the largest city in the world and had a population of about 225,000 people. The second largest city was Naples, Italy, or of course it wasn't Italy at the time, it was the Kingdom of Naples. And they had literally half of that population. So if you look at the fact that the early days of the Inquisition in the early 1200s, or I'm sorry, the early 1200s, like around 1220, there was almost never anybody even punished under the Inquisition, much less a death sentence. And later on, once a lot of nations had become Protestant, this was something that was reliant upon the civil government, and the civil governments that were as equally Protestant as they were Catholic refused to carry them out. So there were very few penalties of that sort near the end of the Inquisition either. So you're talking about basically around the 1600s when most of this would have happened, and you didn't have that many people in Europe. I mean, you would have depopulated Europe if you killed 50 million people. So let me explain then. So what did the Inquisition do? What were its boundaries? So let me go back to my analogy of the furnace filter. So I can go to my basement and get out a furnace filter and put it in my furnace to filter out things that are harmful to me. What I can't do is I can't grab a filter out of the basement and go to my next door neighbor's house and without even knocking, just walk into their house and install this filter in their furnace. I can't do that. I can certainly go over to their house and knock on the door and have the filter under my arm, sort of like someone would carry a Bible and go knock on their neighbor's door to preach the good word. And I can tell them, look, I'm really concerned about your health. You really need this filter. You should install this. But I can't just force it on them. And why is that? Well, because our Lord, when he came down and he had his Last Supper, what did he say to his followers at his Last Supper? He gave them the cup and said, take this, all of you, and drink from it. This is the cup of my blood, the blood of the new and everlasting covenant, the mystery of faith. It will be shed for you and for many unto the remission of sins. For many. Not for everybody. Did he not die for everybody? Of course he did. But he understood that not everyone was going to accept him. So what does he mean by that? I mean, if he was going to come here and save us, would he just force that on everybody and make us all saved? No. Because the whole point is he wants us to love him. He wants us to accept him individually. So there is this, what is known as the doctrine of free will. So by forcing someone to do this, you are violating the doctrine of free will. Every Roman Catholic theologian, from the apostles themselves, all the way up until kind of this cloudy, murky area in the church around the 1960s, which has kind of gotten out of control, every theologian understood the doctrine of free will. You can't force this on anybody. So this idea that the church just went around and said, well, you're dangerous because you don't agree with us, and put him to death, it's absolutely ludicrous. Nothing of the sort ever happened. Proof? Yeah, there's a real simple proof, and you can look this up yourself. Some of the most vile sources imaginable, like Wikipedia. Wikipedia, if you're wanting to know who won the Super Bowl in 1972, you can look that up on Wikipedia, and you're going to get an answer, and it's going to be a correct answer. But anything that is a partisan issue that's got two or more sides, two or more belligerents in the argument, it's not an honest source. But you can still look this up there, and you can look it up in the Encyclopedia Britannica, pretty much anything. And that is the in 1518 and 1519, there were a series of debates between Martin Luther, who of course began what we know today as Protestantism, and Cardinal Cajetan, who was the representative of the Roman Catholic Church. Of course, Luther, was his religion was growing by leaps and bounds because there's a lot of people wanted to rebel against the church because there were a lot of thou shalt nots, and this wasn't the church saying this. This was God saying this. It's in His commandments. You shall not kill. You shall not commit adultery. These are just things that are common sense. And so, for whatever reasons, starting with Martin Luther, a lot of people began breaking away and starting these Protestant sects. So this was literally in the height of the Inquisition, when it was at its peak strength, that this occurred. And so if Martin Luther was a Protestant and didn't agree with Catholics, and Catholics were rounding up all these people and murdering them, and Martin Luther was in a predominantly Roman Catholic nation where he lived, there wouldn't have been any debates. No, the church would have just hauled him in and put him to death. That would have been the end of it. But no, they had debates. Why? Because Martin Luther said, I am not part of your church anymore. I'm starting my own religion. I've got my own church. So then who did the Inquisition apply to? It applied to Roman Catholics. So one of the things that went on that was giving Martin Luther so much strength, so much backing, was that he was right about a lot of stuff. And a lot of Catholics today, they kind of cringe at that and go, oh no, that's not true. This Pope didn't do this, and these priests weren't, engaged in this and that. Yeah, they were, actually. And so the hierarchy of the church said, look, if we are going to combat this man, one of the most important things we can do is make sure our own house is clean. We have to make some changes. We need to go back to the basics. And so they created what was known as the Catholic Counter-Reformation, which was the whole purpose of the very famous Council of Trent. So there was Inquisition prior to that. There were a lot of heresies spreading around Europe. And if somebody wanted to declare themselves outside of the church, they could spew that stuff all they wanted. But if you consider yourself a Roman Catholic and you were buying into one of these heresies, that was not going to work. And that's what the early Inquisitions were about. What do we mean by Inquisition? An inquiry. So you've been spewing this heresy, and so there's an inquiry. People are asking questions. Why are, who's saying this? Why are they saying it? Where are they getting it from? Is there somebody higher up that's preaching this to them? Has anyone told them that it's acceptable to hold these views? So it really wasn't it wasn't really something that was formalized until 1252 by Pope Innocent IV, when he literally created an office then that was going to take control of this. Prior to that, it was just basically done by, local priests, the bishop of the diocese, whoever. And so they began the official Inquisition in 1252, although, like I said, it did pre-exist that. And they basically had mostly, as time went on, it became the Franciscans and the Dominicans who would carry this out. So these are people who are very well trained and live their entire lives revolving around life in the church. So these are people that should be trustworthy to carry out this mission. So before I get into the he said, she said nonsense of the Inquisition, let me just explain to you how it worked. And this will make sense as far as what time period there were a lot of prosecutions and time periods when there simply weren't. So the way that an official Inquisition would work is there would be a declaration put out there. It would be preached from the Pope to the bishops in the diocese all over the world, which of course at that time the New World didn't even exist yet. I mean, it existed, but there weren't any Roman Catholic churches there, so there was nobody to proselytize over here. So the bishops of the various dioceses then would tell all their priests, this is something that is required. You must speak about this from the pulpit. but generally this was it wasn't so much a worldwide thing, it's a very regional thing. You've got this little city in Italy or France or Spain or wherever, and there's a lot of people buying into this heresy there. So the priests and all of the parishes in that small city or small town then would speak about this from the pulpit and say, this is what we're hearing, and this is what is or is not acceptable, not to the priest, not to the Pope. This contradicts all of these 1,200 plus years of oral tradition as handed down from our Lord himself to his apostles. This cannot continue. This is what the heresy is, and this is why it is wrong. And you must abjure of that heresy. You must confess this. Done. And generally, in the early days, before this even became an official thing, you would put that out there and people go, oh, yeah, it was me. I didn't know. I didn't understand. I heard this from somebody else. And then, well, who was the person you heard it from? And so it would have a trickle-down effect. And eventually they'd weed out all the people. And sometimes they'd even find somebody who literally hated the church and was doing this intentionally to mislead the faithful, who maybe were working men who quite honestly didn't have much of an education. Many of them couldn't even read and write. In fact, in those days, most people couldn't read and write. And if you couldn't like read the Bible, for example, which would be in languages that you didn't even understand. So once they were corrected, they were corrected. And they corrected their lives. They did exactly what they were told and got back into the good graces of the church. As time went on, that wasn't quite that easy. If for no other reason, because nobody wants to tell their next door neighbor, I don't know what you're talking about. So they would first announce it and explain what this heresy was. And then they would have what was known as an auto de fe. So this is like a parade. And they would have a parade through the street. And the centerpiece of this parade, of course, would be whoever this Dominican or Franciscan or even the secular priest or usually a bishop was, who was going to preside over the Inquisition in this particular town or village or city. And this was an official announcement saying, all right, we gave you a chance to come forward and admit that you have been doing things wrong. Now, starting with this parade, this is our announcement that we are beginning an inquiry. This is where it's going to get ugly. Again, they were told, if you come forward now, we'll clear all this up and everything will be fine. Some people got a little bit snippy about it and didn't want to come forward, and those people, they weren't put to death. I mean, come on, you if nothing else, you're embarrassed or you're scared or you're ashamed or whatever, and you don't want to come out and admit that you've been preaching something that was heretical. It's not the end of the world. So most of these people would be given a very strict penance. Some of them it could be pretty strict. For example, you may have to make a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. I mean, that's pretty strict. I mean, how many people could even afford to go to the Holy Land? Sometimes they put you in stocks in the public square so people could come by and slap you and spit on you and mock you. Those would be some of the more strict punishments. And beyond that, sometimes it would get really, really down and dirty. It would get pretty tough. What they found is that most of these people who were engaging in the spreading of these heresies were not really the Catholic people. And they certainly weren't Protestants either. Like I said, Protestants would have just left. They would have said, well, we don't agree with you people. We're going to split. We're going to start our own religion. Now, these are people who, for some reason, wanted to remain within the church and be able to mislead people internally. So, it's kind of like what spies do today in one country to another. You infiltrate. So this is basically infiltration. And these kind of people, they would get militant. They weren't going to just back down. These are the kind of people that, for example, a Muslim from the Holy Land or from North Africa comes into Europe and they convert to Roman Catholicism, or at least they say they did. And they're preaching these heresies, trying to destroy the church from within. And when they were found out, many of them were exiled. No, get out of our country. You came here because you claimed that you wanted to become a good Catholic, and now you've shown yourself to be the exact opposite. You need to leave. And they would be sent back to North Africa or the Middle East or wherever it was that they came from. So some of these people would be really, really diehard. And it's like, look, if you just back down now, we can still work this out. Yeah, you'll probably be exiled. If you don't, then you will be found guilty by the ecclesiastical courts. It could get ugly. And they still wouldn't back down. So let me give you one example. In France, for example, the inquisitor at the time was Bernard Guy. And so what they were doing was they're finding that a lot of these people, these Valencians and some of these other heretics that were active in France, that they weren't really Catholic anyway. They were basically Jews who had come from the Middle East, or had come even a century or more before, and they had converted to Roman Catholicism, and then were put on trial by Inquisition, and they would finally throw their hands in the air and say, "Wait, this isn't fair. We were forced at the point of a sword to convert. We didn't really want to convert. We didn't want to become one of you. So you forced us to, and now you're going to put us on trial for it when we're not sincere about it." And so shortly thereafter, so he basically let him off the hook and said, yeah, you can't do that. It's a violation of the doctrine of free will. You can't force someone. So later, things just kept getting worse. These people kept up with the infiltration. I mean, they would destroy churches. They would invite enemies of the church in to attack, and so on and so forth. It was really out of control. You'd have to study a lot of the history of it. It was an ugly situation in parts of Europe. And it was because of these infiltrators. Again, this is our furnace filter. We're sifting out the things that will cause us harm. So the next man that came on board as the Inquisitor of France was a man by the name of Nicholas Emmerich. And Nicholas Emmerich finally wrote a huge tome on how to go about carrying out an Inquisition. And one of the things he said was, as a Roman Catholic, if someone threatened you with death, should you not renounce your faith or renounce your belief in Jesus Christ as the Messiah who came to save us, then if you were put to death, you would become a martyr. You would go straight to heaven by the very fact that you were martyred. That's what we would do, or we should do, as Roman Catholics, or as at that early in the history of Christianity, they just called them Christians. There were no Catholics that didn't need to use the term, because the only Christians on the planet were Roman Catholics. There weren't any Protestants or fundamentalists at that point. So we would be expected to accept martyrdom. And he says, so now we've got these people, and they're infiltrators, and they continue to be infiltrators, and they're destroying not only the church from within, but they're even destroying civil society. And they're wanting to be given a free ride, a get out of jail free card like you get in Monopoly, because they were forced to be, to be converts, which of course, first of all, it became very obvious that was not the case. These people were not being forced to convert. They were lying. But on top of that, he says, no, if we are expected to be willing to put our life on the line for our belief, then how can we expect anything less of them? If they are really as diehard about their faith as they say they are, then they would die willingly before they would give it all up and become Roman Catholic. And so when he wrote this huge tome, that was incorporated into it. No, you don't get a free ride based on that particular argument. So, and that was all part of the Inquisition, is sorting out, who was sincere and who was not sincere, and that it really kind of came to a head in Spain. And that's why the Spanish Inquisition, as some people refer to it, it was literally all just the Inquisition, but they talk about the Spanish Inquisition because it did get so volatile. Like I said, in the early days of the Inquisition, it was just, hey, do you realize you're saying something wrong? No, I'm sorry, I didn't realize. You correct that and things are fine. Later, years after the Spanish Inquisition, you've got people adhering to heresies and basically civil governments who, by this time, you've got Lutherans and Calvinists and eventually Church of England and Presbyterians and what have you, and they will not support the Holy Office of the Inquisition. What does that matter? Well, it matters a lot, because they talk about how the church put to death all these millions of people. And really, if you read any scholarly writers, they say thousands. If you look at strictly Catholic documentation, the church, of course, documents trials. I mean, every trial that takes place in every county and every city and every state and at the federal level in the United States and in most countries, everything is documented. You have court recorders and everything that are, writing it all down. And so we know exactly how many people were put on trial and so on and so forth, and even what the punishment was that was passed down. And there were, throughout the entire 500 plus years of the Inquisition, there were less than 400 people who were ever put to death. By the Catholic Church? No. From the 1100s, early 1200s onward, when the Inquisition was an actual thing, there was no nation anywhere in Europe, and this was a European thing. Like I said, the New World wasn't discovered yet. This didn't branch into Asia and North Africa and the Middle East. No, this was a European thing. There was no country in Europe anywhere in which the Roman Catholic Church or any other religious institution had the authorization to put someone to death. A good example would be if you look at the trial of our Lord himself. So the Jews wanted to say this man he's a blasphemer. He needs to be punished for this crime. So what did they do? Well, they took him to Pontius Pilate, the Roman. Well, he's not one of theirs. I mean, they've got their own religious tribunal. Why can't they just try him and put him to death? Because they weren't allowed to. Because Rome controlled the Holy Land at that point in time. And no religious institution had the authorization to put the man to death. So they had to go to Pilate. And even their phony king, Herod, I mean, come on, that was a mockery is all that was. Herod was never recognized by the Jews as their king. So he didn't want to have anything to do with it, and he turned it back over to Caesar, or to Pontius Pilate. Same sort of thing. So in no country was the church ever allowed to put someone to death. So what was going on in Spain? Well, a lot. There was a lot of heresy. There was a lot of attacking and murdering of Roman Catholics in their homes. Most of the cities there were fortified because of Islamic invasions out of North Africa. So they fortified their cities. And so what they found out was that either Muslims who claimed to have converted, or Jews living in those cities who claimed to have converted, would open the gates in the middle of the night and let these invading armies come in there and would literally murder men, women, and children in their beds in the middle of the night. That needs to stop. And this is the problem that confronted Ferdinand and Isabella. Ferdinand of Aragon, Isabella of Spain, or of Castile, which later became united as Spain. And so their Grand Inquisitor was Tomás de Torquemada. So Torquemada was a Dominican priest, and he was a convert from Judaism. And he said, look, I know these people. I know how deceptive they can be. And the other thing is they'll just look you in the eye and blatantly lie to you. How can you look at one of them in a tribunal, in an inquisition, and say, I know this person, they're good, they're all right. And then the next thing you know, no, they weren't, and they stab you in the back. He says, the bottom line is, you can't know that, and you can't trust them. So the only logical conclusion is, all of them, both the Muslims and the Jews in Spain, have got to go. You got to get them out of here. And that's exactly what they did. They literally exiled all of them from Spain. And of course, it went on for years after that. There were still some that said, you can't exile me. I'm not one of them. I'm a Roman Catholic. I've been living here all my life. No, they were infiltrators. And so it continued to be a problem thereafter. Let me give you an example that will kind of shed a little light on this. So one of the areas, the Roman Catholic areas that was involved in the Inquisition was Romania, or Transylvania, which is part of Romania. And they were under a king by the name of Vlad Dracul, or a prince. So he was the civil authority there. And so you had these people that were infiltrators, and they were found out, and so they were taken before Vlad Dracul, who, today, of course, people refer to him as Vlad the Impaler, and he just got great delight in dropping their bodies on these big pointed tree trunks that would jab through their body and impaling them, and then he would catch the blood and drink the blood with his dinner, and all these outlandish stories that these people have come up with. No, he was simply a prince, and in his country, unlike other countries, for example, in more modern times, we know that, for example, if you were put to death in England, you were hung. If you were put to death in France, you were beheaded with the guillotine. So, like, different countries had their own way of carrying out the capital punishment. And in Vlad's country, the punishment was impalement. He didn't do it because he delighted in it. He did it because it was a civil duty as the authority in that country. And so these people were put to death. So in more modern times, we have an author. His name was Abraham Stoker. We refer to him as Bram Stoker. He was a Jew, and of course he has studied his ancestry, and he knows that his ancestors were these infiltrators who wanted to destroy the Roman Catholic Church. And so he wrote this book, Dracula, which is basically a mockery of Vlad Dracul, where he portrays him as, first of all, this man of the devil. He's evil and he's uncontrollable, and he just wants to drink people's blood. He lives off the blood of others. And then to really rub salt in the wound, if you look at an exorcisms can only be done by Roman Catholic priests. A lot of other people claim they do, these TV evangelists and all. Oh yeah, no, they can't do it because they don't have the authority to do it. This is an authority that was handed down from our Lord Himself to the apostles, and they, through their papal authority and the bishops, have passed that on by ordination to the priesthood. So only a Roman Catholic priest can actually perform an exorcism. So to rub salt in the wound, Bram Stoker in his book, of course, has this, I don't even remember the guy's name. It's not like I'm a big fan of the book or anything. But the guy is a Calvinist, and he's like the hero in the book, and he comes along and he's able to defeat Dracula and, put the stake through his heart or whatever the heck happens in the book. Like I say, I've seen so many variations on that theme and really have no great interest in it myself. Just to rub salt in the wind and say, not only was the church evil, but the church is not the only one that has the ability to suppress evil. This Calvinist came along and did basically the same thing. So this is not just a religious problem. This is also a civil problem. Let me give you some examples here. one really big example. Let's look at Great Britain under Queen Victoria. So this is in our day. I mean, basically, for example, you start talking about things that went on in, like during the Italian Renaissance. Some of it's really hard to document because, how much writing do we have from the time? How many people could even write? But the reign of Queen Victoria in England, we have everything. We have her diary, we have all the court documents, we have all the royal documents, we have everything. We have all the information we could ever want concerning the reign of Queen Victoria. Now, during her reign, there was basically a constant trade-off in the role of Prime Minister of England. So she is basically the supreme authority, but the one that runs the country, basically like the president, is the Prime Minister. And this jumped back and forth every election between William Gladstone and Benjamin Disraeli. So William Gladstone was the liberal, which in modern terms basically means the conservative. And Benjamin Disraeli was the conservative, which in modern terms means the liberal. We've kind of reversed roles over the years. So Queen Victoria, being a young girl when she ascended the throne, was a bit stubborn and really kind of, hey, I'm the queen, you can't tell me what to do sort of person. And so she always despised Gladstone. She didn't like him, but she couldn't do much about it. She had to deal with him when he was holding the office. And why? Well, because it'd school her, like it talk belittling to her like she was a little schoolgirl. And why did he do that? Because she was. She needed to be educated a little bit. And he's saying, Mom, you can't do it this way. Well, you can't tell me what to do. He needs to tell you what to do. But she despised that. Benjamin Disraeli, on the other hand, I guess the best way to describe him is back in the 1960s, there was a very interesting rock band out of New York City. They were known as the New York Rock and Roll Ensemble. Very unique. They weren't like hard rock. They were more like along the lines of like the song Nights in White Satin, something of that tempo and that drive. Okay, so not like the hard rock that people listen to today. And they were very unique because some of the members went to Juilliard School of Music, so they were classical musicians, and so they would be playing this Nights in White Satin kind of song, and just out of the clear blue they'd pull out some oboes and stuff and break into a Brandenburg concerto right in the middle of this light rock piece. My favorite song by them was a song called Faithful Friends and Flattering Foe. What a great name. So regardless of what she thought of William Gladstone, he was a faithful friend. He believed in her, he believed in England, he believed in Christianity. He was a very die-hard Christian man. On the other hand, Benjamin Disraeli came from a Jewish family who, starting with his mother and father, converted to the Church of England, and it was a phony conversion. The man was never really a convert. And so he was a foe, at least a foe of Christianity, and then later he proved himself to be a foe of England as well. And what did he do? He flattered her all the time. For example, when they took direct control of India, he says, Mom, this is what we need to do. I am going to declare you the Empress of India. Oh, the Empress of India, that's just magnificent. She was so excited about that. Get this grand new title. So he flattered her all the time. That's what your foe does. That's how your foe takes control. That's how your foe fools you. So, just like that song, that was the difference between Gladstone and Disraeli. So, as you may or may not know, there were some skirmishes between Russia, which was a Christian nation. Some of them were, Russian Orthodox. Most of them were Roman Catholic, and the Ottoman Empire in Turkey. And of course, the Ottomans were not just Islamic, and there were some very mild Islamic peoples, like the Sufis, for example. I mean, they have religious orders of monks and nuns, just like the Roman Catholic Church does. Islam is not a pagan religion. Islam is a schism. They used to be the old Christians, and in the 700s they literally broke away and said, we're not going to follow this anymore. So a lot of that was still retained. But the Sufis were fairly small in number, and the Ottomans, on the other hand, were very militant. And so there were all these skirmishes between the Ottomans and the Russians. And so at one point, Disraeli, who at the time was the prime minister, went to Queen Victoria and said, look, we're risking something here. If Russia should conquer the Ottoman Empire, that puts them right at the mouth of the Khyber Pass, and they can go through the Khyber Pass and invade our holdings in India, and we could lose that extension of our empire in India. And India, that was a lot at that time. That was modern-day India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, half of Burma, Bhutan. That was a lot of real estate, and it was directly under the control of England by that time. And he's saying the Russians could go in there and take that over. Well, the Russians never showed any desire doing any such thing. The Russians were defending their Christian people against these incursions by these radical Muslims. And so he insisted we need to get involved in this, and that was where the Crimean War came from. And in the Crimean War, England took the side of Muslim Ottoman Empire against Christian Russia. Why would that ever happen? Because the man was never really a convert. People knew that he did things like Seder meals and had his menorah at Passover and so on and so forth. And they kind of brushed it off as well. He just likes to tinker with his family's history. He thinks that's really neat. Then he's not doing a very good job at Church of England, because if you go back to St. Paul's letter to the Hebrews, he tells us you're not to do these things. All of these things that are talked about as far as dietary restrictions and wearing the little locks in front of the ears and the black hat and the big beard and the whole 9 yards, all of these are things that we did in preparation for the coming of the Messiah. Now that the Messiah has come, you need to stop doing these. Because if you're doing these things, then you are at least indirectly denying that our Lord Jesus Christ was the Messiah. You can't do these things. But he did them anyway. Why? Because he wasn't really a convert. And so this is really what the Inquisition was about. The Inquisition never went after people for saying, look, I don't want to be part of your religion. I don't believe as you believe. No, it went after people who insisted that they were Catholics in good standing and subverted the church from within. Now, where did this go all of a sudden? Well, it kind of came to an end with the French Revolution. Pope Pius XI once said, if it had not been for the Inquisition, this world would have suffered the scourge of communism 500 years earlier. Wow, that's quite a statement. What did he mean by that? Well, this mentality of communism has been around for hundreds of years. This is not a new thing. And it was starting to show its ugly head at the time of the Council of Trent. And that's why it was very important for the church to get its ducks in a row and go back to the basics so they could start to combat this. And they did so, and they did so very effectively. But that all came to an end with the French Revolution. What was the French Revolution? This Enlightenment theology, or just some people just refer to it as the Enlightenment. It was communism. That's exactly what it was. And it had help. And this may offend some people who are watching this video, but this isn't me, this is the church. There have been more than one pope who has come out and said that no Roman Catholic can ever become a member of the Freemasons. You cannot become a Freemason. Why? Well, because in order to do so, you have to take secret oaths. You have to take an oath to protect all of the secrets of Freemasonry. Well, what if one of the secrets is that they've killed, dozens and dozens of people, and they've overthrown governments and so on and so on? You're supposed to remain silent about that. What if they're murderers? So if they're murderers, you got to remain silent. And an oath is only valid if taken to God. So when you make an oath, even to join this organization, that oath is an oath to God that you will never betray their secrets. The other thing that you have to take in your oath is you have to pledge your obedience to the hierarchy of the lodge. And you don't even know who that person is. They could be your diehard enemy. It could be Joseph Stalin. It could be Joseph Mengele. Yeah, you don't know who this person is, but you've taken an oath to God that you're going to obey him. So because of that reason, you can never join Freemasonry. You are, by the very fact that you join, as soon as you take those oaths, you are ipso facto excommunicated from the Roman Catholic Church. You cease to be Catholic. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. You're done. And so that was a very big part of the French Revolution. Not so much Muslims, more Jews were involved in that. But their henchmen, because they were a very low population, especially in France at that point in time. So they had the Freemasons, who used to, at one point in time, were a working men's guild, which were great things, actually. In the Middle Ages, the working men's guilds were marvelous, unlike modern day trade unionism, which is an entirely different animal. And at one point, they were what is known as illuminated, where they were basically hoodwinked by people who, again, preached secret heresy to them constantly until they started believing it. And so these are the people who helped with the overthrow of France. And when that happened, they did two things. They suppressed the Holy Office of the Inquisition, and they suppressed the Jesuit order. The Jesuits, having been created as basically the militants of the Roman Catholic Church, not meaning pick up the sword and go kill people, but being the bulldog that's going to go root this stuff out and put an end to it. So in closing, let me just say that this was the essence of the Inquisition. So you can tell near the end there was very little cooperation. So there weren't like tens of thousands of people dying near the end of the Inquisition. And in the early days, people understood that they were adhering to a heresy, and they abjured that heresy and confessed it. And for the most part, almost nobody was ever punished, not even a minor punishment, because they came right out and said, hey, I just didn't know, So the Inquisition has been grossly misrepresented. People today are more than willing to look at something they hear on the news and say, oh, this is obviously revisionist history. This is communists trying to take us over. And I agree, it is. That's exactly what it is. Why won't you believe that about the revisionist history concerning the Roman Catholic Church? Literally, what we are seeing today is a mentality that's always been there, but it has never been predominant before, the last 15 years, let's say. And why? Because the Roman Catholic Church was the bulwark. They were the ones that were steadfast in preventing this from happening. Now that you've basically watered them down and suppressed them, and people are leaving the Roman Catholic Church in hundreds of thousands, if not millions, every single year, there's no defense. And you're seeing the result of that now. The only thing that's been staving that off for the last 500 years, in the words of Pope Pius XI, was the Holy Office of the Inquisition. Thank goodness that we had that, or who knows what kind of people would be today. So that's all I've got to say on the issue. Again, don't take my word for it, although I am a trained Roman Catholic theologian. Start looking it up. Do a little research on your own. And obviously you don't want to read just the literature of those people who attack the church and attack the Inquisition. There are other avenues to go as well. But research it well. Believe it, know it in your heart that what I'm telling you is fact and is the truth about the Inquisition. It was not a bad thing. It was not an abused thing. Were there abuses? Yeah, well, there's abuses in anything and everything. Governments abuse, other religions abuse. Take, for example, the Salem witch trials in Salem, Massachusetts. Now, that was all done by fundamentalist Christians. And literally, people just jumped on the bandwagon because they didn't like their next door neighbor, so they accused them of witchcraft, and the next thing you know, they're being burned at the stake. See, they can do that, but the Roman Catholic can't, right? Know these things. Educate yourself on this. And be willing to stand up to those who attack the church and say, no, you are wrong. That is not the fact. Educate yourself on these things so that you can defend the Inquisition and defend the Holy Roman Catholic Church. Thank you for watching.